So you want to install Jenkins, and you want to install Jenkins on Windows. Well, I'm here to tell you, you came to the right place. Hi, I'm Cameron McKenzie. I'm the editor-in-chief over at the serverside.com, and I've been working with Jenkins all the way back to when they used to call it Hudson. And I want to show you how to download, install Jenkins on a Windows machine, but I want to do more than that. I actually want to take you on a bit of a journey that involves working with Jenkins, getting it installed, building Jenkins build jobs, including Maven or Gradle, interacting with GitHub, interacting with Git, and maybe even building some sort of a Jenkins continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. Now, I'm not going to waste too much of your time. I'm going to get this started right away. And the first thing we need to do to install Jenkins is make sure that we have a version of the JDK. Jenkins runs on Java. So you need to install Java on your local operating system. And by the way, the operating system that I'm using here is just a clean Windows installation. The only thing I've got installed on this Windows operating system is software for recording these videos. Now, if you want to grab an open source version of the JDK, head over to Eclipse Adoptium. The version that they've got there is called Tamarin, and there's the Windows JDK MSI file. I'm going to click on that, Windows x86. It's going to ask me if I want to actually download the file, and of course I am. You're going to open up that little downloads folder. Just kind of monitor that just for a minute as it downloads, and it looks like it's pretty close to being downloaded. I'm going to do a quick double check, and if it's downloaded, then open that file up. So here we are, right clicking. I'm going to select install. And Java is pretty straightforward to install. There's not much you have to really select here. A couple of things I like to do. I like to set Java home. So Java home is a variable that some programs will look for to find out where Java was installed. You definitely want to add the Java bin folder to the path. That's one of the options. I'm not really that interested in this Oracle registration. One thing I like to do is I like to actually change the install directory, and I like to just change that to _tools and then just JDK 17 for me. But, you know, I mean, you can accept the defaults. We're probably not going to run into this pattern in the future unless you actually kind of register your JDK with Jenkins. But that is basically it. That gets my Java environment installed. After that's installed, I could probably go in and open up a command prompt and type in java-version, and it would tell me what version of Java is installed. Why don't I do that? There's the command window, Java version, and boom, it tells me that Java 17 Tamarin, the word runtime rearranged, is installed on my computer. And that tells me that I can install Jenkins. Now, really, if you want to get the most out of Jenkins, you need to install Git, and you need to install a build tool probably. If you're running Python, you need a Python build environment. If you're running Java, you'll need Gradle or Maven. I'm going to install Maven in the future, but you know, you came here to see Jenkins get installed, so let's install Jenkins. The URL is actually jenkins.io/download, and when you get to that page, you'll get a couple of different options for doing the install. You can actually just download a WAR file and run the WAR file. That is a completely legit way to run Jenkins because Jenkins is packaged and deployed as an executable WAR file. Maybe getting the Windows installer might be a little bit easier. So I'm going to download that Jenkins MSI file. I'll head over here into this downloads folder and wait for that to download. Okay, and it looks like that has downloaded. So everything is good. We now have the chance to install the Jenkins MSI. It took a while for it to download there. I don't know, my internet connection is slow. It's not a huge file, only 160 megs, but here we go. Do we want to install Jenkins 2.414? My answer to that question is yes. Now, by the way, it's going to install it into program files there. I would say I just like to install everything into _tools. And just my personal preference, I don't like uppercase letters in installation folders, but You can accept the defaults there. That's just a preference for me. It asks you how you want to log in. I'm just going to run it as a local service. That means Jenkins is going to start up every time the computer starts up. We'll run it on port 8080. Hopefully we don't have anything running on port 8080. I don't. You can always change it, but 8080 is often used to develop Spring Boot applications, Java applications, Jakarta applications. So you might want to change that port, but I'm going to accept the defaults here. Notice it wants my JDK installation. There it is, _tools, JDK, it found it. Then I say run on that version of Java. And then finally it says, okay, when your computer starts up, do you want to start up Jenkins? Of course I do. Why wouldn't I want to start up Jenkins? Jenkins is awesome. So we're done there. Now we go in, click install, and that's about it. Jenkins installs. There we go. And there is the Jenkins mascot. Now, here's some interesting trivia for you. The mascot for Jenkins is, as you can see, a butler. That's the name Jenkins. It's kind of a common name for butlers in television and movies. Before Jenkins, the project was called Hudson. And Hudson is also a common name for a butler. And there's a reason for that. It's a bit of an inside joke. You see, a butler doesn't actually do anything. And despite what you may have seen by watching The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and seeing Joffrey making dinner and stuff, that's actually not what a butler does. A butler doesn't make dinner. A butler organizes the chefs. A butler doesn't clean the house. A butler organizes the housekeeping staff. The butler doesn't clean the pool. The butler hires people. So the butler doesn't do anything. The butler just calls on other people to do stuff for him or her. And that's kind of the funny thing about Jenkins. Jenkins doesn't do anything. You know, I always say to people, you know, if you want to know what Jenkins does, the truth is Jenkins doesn't do anything, because it doesn't. What it does is if it needs to build something, well, it calls on Gradle or Maven to do that. If it needs to compile some code, it calls on the Java compiler to do it. If it needs to build a Docker image, it calls on Docker Desktop for Windows to do that. So it doesn't actually do anything. And that's kind of the joke about the mascot being a butler, because Jenkins doesn't do anything. Now, despite that, it's an amazing tool. It's great for automation, CI, CD, you name it. But that's sort of the inside joke that's going on there. So I'll click finish. And let's see, I'm going to open up a browser. Go to localhost 8080. We should have Jenkins registered as a service. Oh, look at that. Just took a while for it to come up. It says, hey, we're going to get started. We're going to run for the very first time. And just to make sure that you are who you say you are, let us know that you can actually get into the Jenkins home folder and find out the initial password. So the first thing you got to do is really prove that you have access to the computer that Jenkins is installed on in order to get into the computer for the very first time. So I'm going to type that in there. Go to that folder. There we go. Jenkins, secrets, initial admin password. Copy that and then just paste it in. And boom, we've now got access to Jenkins. Now, as you can imagine, you're accessing Jenkins for the first time from a URL. And there's a possibility that maybe you installed Jenkins, but somebody else that's got nefarious intentions has got access to the URL the very first time. So the first time you install it, the first time you run Jenkins, they want you to prove who you are. Now, Jenkins lives on plugins. Everything that happens in Jenkins happens through a plugin. And there's a variety of suggested plugins that Jenkins provides. And it's really not useful if you don't install these suggested plugins. So I'm going to accept the request to install the basic plugins. Notice there's Git, LDAP, Gradle, Ant, Workspace Cleanup, Mailer. One thing about these different plugins, the plugins get installed, but it's not installing the software. This is just code inside of Jenkins that makes it possible to connect to a Git installation that makes it possible to work with a Gradle installation, makes it possible to work with an Ant installation. So generally with Jenkins, when you want to add functionality, what you do is you install a plugin, then you actually install the software. So let's say you want to use SonarQube. You would install the SonarQube software. Then you would install the SonarQube plugin. And then you configure Jenkins to use that SonarQube installation through that SonarQube plugin that was installed inside of Jenkins. And so that's basically how that plugin architecture for Jenkins works. Okay, and after all the plugins have been installed, it's time to create your first user. I'm going to call mine Jenkins. And it'll be Jenkins for the username, Jenkins for the password, Jenkins as the email address. Click Save and Continue. Asks again just for the URL. I'll click Finish, and then boom, it asks me if I want to start using Jenkins. And of course I do. I can't wait to start using Jenkins. And so here you go. Here's the Jenkins user interface. You can get lost in here. You know, I always remind people, if you get lost, just click on the Jenkins head and it takes you back to the start. I'm going to just test this installation and see if it works, right? Like see if I can create a basic Jenkins build job. So I'm going to click this new item option here, and I'm going to call my job my first Jenkins build job. Notice there's a couple of options here, like the pipeline. That looks like a Super Mario Brothers icon there. Multi-configuration project, multi-branch pipeline. Love the multi-branch pipeline option. When you start out, you usually just create a freestyle project. And that's what I'm going to do. Just create a freestyle project here. Click OK. And really, this is just a GUI-based window to set up a build that might interact with Git or GitHub, might do a compilation of code with Maven or Gradle, maybe even build an artifact with and a Docker image with Docker Desktop for Windows, something along those lines. And as you can see, just a number of different options here. Parameterize, throttle builds. Are we going to use source code management? Notice one of the options is Git. Now, Git actually won't work right now because I don't have Git installed locally. I'm going to do that in just a moment, but I actually got to stay away from that Git option for now. Notice there's options for build triggers, right? One of the things about a Jenkins build job is you have to figure out when should it run. Quite often we run it whenever somebody checks some code into maybe the main branch or the master branch, or more likely as the developers are checking their topic branches into the development line, trunk line of their Git flow configuration, something like that. But basically you got to figure out when should we call our Jenkins build jobs. So one way is to actually have a Git repository call Jenkins to run. Another way is to maybe have Jenkins call a GitHub repository periodically. Another way is just to, maybe pull the source code management tool every hour or every day. So those are different options. Then there's build environment options. The next thing I want to take a look at is just build steps. And so we've got the ability to add a build step here. You can see that, one of the options is invoke a Gradle script, which makes sense because Gradle is used to build Java applications. Is there another one there for working with Maven? Yeah, invoke top-level Maven targets. We don't have Maven or Gradle installed yet. We're going to. Stay with me on this journey. But right now I'm just going to execute a Windows batch command. And basically here you can type in any batch command. So I'll say echo hello world. Is that hello comma world or hello world? I don't know, whatever. But that's a build step. Now, normally you would compile code, run, test, build a Docker image, package up a WAR file or a jar file, something along those lines. But right now I'm just going to echo out hello world. I'm going to click apply. I'm going to click save. I'm going to click save. I'm going to click apply. I'm going to apply again. Then I'm going to click save. And I keep doing that until it takes me back to the screen for the Jenkins build job where it's got the option to build now. And that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to build this Jenkins job and see if it runs. It says the schedule, the build is scheduled. In the bottom left-hand corner, I can now see that this job has run. I can come over here, click on this job, takes me in to allow me to see more details about this job. And then it says, hey, there's some console output, and look at that. All of a sudden, the console output is hello world. Now, one thing I don't like is I don't like this great, big, long location to where everything that Jenkins is doing being buried under program data Jenkins files. All of the configuration of this local instance is going to get put under that .jenkins folder. That's your Jenkins home folder. And to me, that just makes it awkward for doing things like backing up data or maybe even troubleshooting in the future. So one thing I often like doing is I like going in and maybe configuring Java home. So I'll type in environment here. Edit the system environment variables. I'm going to click environment variables here, and I'll add a new system variable, and I'll call it Jenkins home. And I'm going to put it in C:/_tools, not tools, /JH. Click OK, click OK again. And then under _tools, I'm just going to create that folder. JH for Jenkins home. And now next time I start up Jenkins, it's going to start using that folder for all of the files that it downloads for the configuration of Jenkins build files, for all of the good, interesting stuff. Anyways, so setting Jenkins home is something that you'll probably want to do in your own environments. Now, we got our first Jenkins build job to run. I always say to people, if you get lost in Jenkins, just click on the Jenkins head. That takes you back home again. You can see here that everything's sunny in Philadelphia. The last time, the history of these running is provides a sunshine. The last time it ran, everything was successful. So you get a green check mark right there. So that all looks good for me. So this is kind of your dashboard showing you what's going on with Jenkins. Now, one of the things that we don't have installed is Git, right? Like I want to be able to pull from a Git repository. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to install Git, right? I'm just going to type in install Git. See if I can find the Git downloads page. Git download. There we go, Git downloads. And I'm just going to install Git on my local machine. If I can install Git, I'm going to use the 64-bit setup. If I can install Git, that's going to allow me not only to run Git commands, which are pivotally important, but I'm going to be able to pull code off of GitHub, off of my remote repositories. And if I can pull code from my remote repositories, well, then I'll have some code that I can go in and build. So that is downloaded. I'm going to go into my downloads folder over here. I'm going to install Git. I'll run that as an administrator, although that's probably overkill. We don't need to install that as an administrator. Git is super easy to install. The only change I'm going to make here is I'm going to install it into the _tools Git folder and get rid of that uppercase G. I don't like the uppercase letters. And here you can accept all the defaults. The only thing that I ever change is I always move away from Vim and use Notepad++ as the default editor for Git. If you're installing Git, you'll save yourself a lot of headache if you do that. I'm going to use the main branch here for new Git repositories. Really, when you're working with Git and installing Git, you can accept all of the defaults. It's super easy to get Git installed. It's a quick download, only takes a few minutes. And as that's installing, the other thing I'm going to download and install is Maven, because I want a build tool. And so I've gone over to maven.apache.org/download.cgi, and I've got the option over here to download the binary zip file. So I'm going to do that. Click on the binary zip file. That should only take a moment to download. It's only 9 megs in size, yeah, so that's nothing. And I'm going to quickly unzip that Maven folder, so I'll extract it right there. Boom, Maven is uninstall, well, it's not uninstalled, it's unzipped. I'm actually going to rename that folder just to Maven, and then I'm going to copy that folder. You know where I'm going to copy that folder. I'm going to copy that folder over into my tools directory. And a couple of things after you've downloaded that. You're supposed to do a couple of environment configuration changes here. I think we need to set what? We need to set a new environment variable called m2 home c:/_tools/Maven. And I think we also want to add a new one for Maven home. Right, get those two in there. But more importantly than that, we actually want to add to the class path. So the class path right there, if we edit that, we should see button where there's Git. Looks like we've got Java on there. I want to go and add a new entry here, and specifically the bin directory for Maven. So that means all of the different cool tools that Maven provides for us, especially MVN, will be available for our program. So there's MVN. That is the heart and soul of Maven. Okay, so I've configured that. I'll click OK. I'll click OK again. And I'm just going to open up a command window and type in MVN. Is it double dash version or single dash version? It's single dash with Java, but it's double dash with Maven. By the way, if you had a terminal window or command window already open, you'd have to shut it down and open it up again, because the environment variable is only read when the tool starts up. Sometimes I wish the tool would shut up. So just so you know, if it says, hey, I can't find Maven, it might just be that you may be using a tool that was already open. But yeah, MVN -- version, Git -- version tells me my version of Git. But then it's Java single dash version. And I'm not sure why that is. Somebody please leave a comment and tell me why it's only a single dash for Java. But there we go. It looks like everything is working, and I'm pretty happy with that. So what I want to do now is I want to create a brand new Jenkins build job. Let's head back to Jenkins just for a second. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to have Jenkins go out to GitHub, pull down a repository from GitHub, build the code in GitHub, and I don't know, maybe even, package the application and all of those other interesting good things. So with all of that configured, why don't we go in and now create a new item, a new Jenkins build job, my GitHub Maven job. We'll create a new Jenkins job that's going to pull from GitHub and do a compilation with Maven. So I'll click OK here. I'm just going to take a look at the basic settings here. I'm going to leave those all alone. What I am going to do is I'm going to click on this Git button that allows me to specify Git repository. Now, we need a Git repository. Now, fortunately, I have one. I've actually got a Git repository here. It's my little rock, paper, scissors application that's up on my GitHub account. And you can see there's a beautiful little POM file in there. That means this is a Maven project. So I'm going to click on this beautiful green button here. That gives me access to the GitHub URL. I'm going to copy that. And now I'm going to go back to Jenkins. I'm going to paste that URL right in there. Now, notice that it doesn't respond right away. Like it's giving me that error message, please enter Git repository, but that'll go away in a minute, probably when I tab away onto another field. Now, one thing I do want to point out, notice how the branch specifier is master. In GitHub and Git, the default branch is now main. A lot of repositories won't have a master branch. I'm actually going to go and check on my GitHub repository here and see if it does have a master branch, and it does. So I guess it's an older project there, but just be careful. If you don't have a master branch, you might want to specify main there just to keep everything honest. Okay, so I do have a master branch. I'm going to be building that. So right now I have created a build job. The build job is going to pull from that GitHub repository anytime I run the build. Notice I can set some other build triggers like build periodically or pull the source code management tool. I'm not going to do that. I just want to see Maven working. So I'm going to click over here, add build step. Notice I've got the option to add a top-level Maven target. And I don't know, my favorite top-level Maven target is install. That's going to not only compile code, but also package it as well. I'm going to click apply and then save. I'm then going to click build now, cross my fingers. That's now going to pull down from GitHub. It's going to compile the code. It's then going to package the code into a jar file or a WAR file according to how the project's been configured. And hopefully everything's going to run well. Now, as this job is running, I can actually click on it and take a look at the console output. We'll kind of slowly push out there. Since it's going to Maven for the first time, it looks like it might be pulling down some Maven projects, Maven packages that it needs. But it looks like everything ran well, and it has put this jar file deep down into the bowels of my computer. Let me see if I can actually take a look at that. So what is that? Program data jenkins.java. I don't think it'll allow me to just paste it in there. Oh, it does. That's pretty cool. So right there, you can actually see the link to that file. And this is now a runnable jar file that Jenkins has built for me. And that should host my rock, paper, scissors application. But if I go back here into Jenkins build job, well, we can see that indeed that Jenkins build job has run. It's pulled from GitHub. It's built my application. And I was even able to see there's a jar file there that held all of my code. I think I'm going to take a look at that one more time. I'm going to paste that in. But rather than pasting in the jar, I'm just going to paste in the folder name and see if I can actually get to the folder. No, it doesn't seem to want to let me do that. I'll do that a little bit later. So there you go. That kind of shows you how to work with a Jenkins build job. But you know, more often than not, people aren't creating Jenkins build jobs. They're creating Jenkins pipelines. So I'm going to create a new pipeline project here. I'll call it my pipeline. Click OK. And now, rather than having that GUI tool to specify all of the different build steps, you actually just add a pipeline script. And they've got some samples in here. So they've got like a GitHub plus Maven pipeline. Boy, oh boy, that sounds like it's right up our alley here. And it says, first off, you have to specify what Maven tool you're going to be using. And boy, we haven't specified a Maven tool yet. And then it specifies what you want to do with your Maven project. So you type in your project here. Then what's the command? Well, here they just have Maven do a clean and package. That's kind of like the install. That's one less than the install. And then they, I don't know, looks like they generate some JUnit components and store any JUnit results in /target surefire reports test star.xml. So that all looks pretty good. All looks pretty impressive. Could we run it? Well, one of the things that this is requiring is it's requiring a Maven tool named M3. And we don't have a tool named M3 configured yet. So if we ran this, and even if we gave it the correct URL, and I'm going to find the correct URL here, I'm going to copy that correct URL. So I'm going to change that git URL to this. I'm going to click apply, and I think it's going to bark out at where we say Maven M3. So I'll click save. I'll click build now. And yeah, we've got an error here, but it's an error that we can correct. I'm not too worried about it. But right away, it's saying, hey, I don't know what M3 is. And what it's actually looking for is it's looking for a tool that's been configured in Jenkins named M3. And really, when you set up Jenkins, you're supposed to go in and configure all of the tools that you use. So you can see over here, there's this cogwheel that allows you to do some configurations. I'm going to click on that cogwheel. Sorry, you know what? It's actually going to Jenkins, manage Jenkins. That's where we need to go. So it's click on Jenkins, hit manage Jenkins. And then for manage Jenkins, you'll see this link for tools. I'm going to click on this link for tools. And here you'll see there's an option to, well, configure all of the tools that you're using. So you can see the option to add JDK installations, the option to add Git installations, Gradle installations, Ant installations, and Maven installations. And so I'm going to add a new Maven installation. It's going to be version 3.4. I don't need to install it. I've got one that already exists. I'm going to call it M3. And the home directory is just going to be c_tools_Maven, not underscore slash. That now says I've got a Maven installation, which my build pipelines can reference through the name M3. I'm going to click apply. I'm going to click save. And now with M3 configured, I can head back to my pipeline. I'm going to go actually make a couple of configuration changes to my pipeline because a couple of things I forgot about. Going into my pipeline, I forgot that it actually says shell here. We actually want to make sure that that's a batch script that's being run. And down here where it says success, rather than doing the JUnit stuff, I'm actually just, because I don't think there's a JUnit in that project, I'm just going to say, hey, go to the batch shell and print out the words success. So from there, I'll click apply. Now that I have M3 configured as a tool, you can see M3 right there. I'll click save. I'll click build now. And then when this runs, well, hopefully this build will be successful. Fingers crossed. It looks like it's running. And there we go, build successful. Now, one of the cool things about this repository is it actually has its own Jenkins file in it. So you can see that this repository has a Jenkins file in it already. It's a Jenkins file that's got a number of stages like version, document, environment, compile. It's even got a little stage here that asks the user for input. Do you want to proceed or not? But this is called a Jenkins file, and it's a best practice to always put your Jenkins build files in the repository with your code, right? I mean, it just makes sense. You've got your code, you should have the build script right there next to it in version control, so you're maintaining a history for it. So you can see that's called Jenkins file, and it's in that repository there. One of the other tricks that you can do in Jenkins is if you've got a file named Jenkins file, you can create a new pipeline. I'll call this my Jenkins file pipeline. Click OK. And then all you have to do is where it says pipeline script, you say pipeline from source code management tool. And what source code management tool? Well, obviously it's our GitHub repository. What's the URL of that repository? I just got to look for that beautiful green button. There it is right there. I paste that repository in, and now that build file, that Jenkins file that's in source code management along with the repo is going to be run. Now, as I said, don't worry about that error. As soon as I tab away, it should disappear. Okay, but that's about it. Build the master branch, click apply, click save. Now I'm going to click build now on this particular repository, and I'm going to actually see the results of that Jenkins file that's in the repo come up, and you see the different stages: version, environment, document, compile, acceptance, and then conclusion. Now, remember, I showed you this script, and in the script, it actually had this question in it. It actually said to the user, hey, what you think? Proceed or abort? Wasn't that cool? If yes, echo I agree, else you are hard to please. And now when I look at my Jenkins file, you'll see that it's paused right here. And if I click, I now get a window that asks me if I want to proceed with continuous delivery, if I want to proceed with continuous deployment. And it says, what you think? Wasn't that cool? Yes or no? Proceed or abort? I'll say yes and proceed. And now if I actually go in and take a look at the log files for this particular build, you can actually see it says, I agree, which is exactly what it said in that file. So there you go. That is a whirlwind tour of Jenkins, doing a Jenkins installation on Windows, but also building Jenkins jobs, configuring Maven, configuring Git, building Jenkins pipeline. I mean, it really is a whole whirlwind tour of what you can do with Jenkins after you've installed Jenkins CI on Windows. Now, a couple of things before we bid adieu. I just wanted to say, if you're on Amazon, I wrote a little book a little while ago all about The Simpsons. It's all about how Springfield in The Simpsons is based on a little southern Ontario town called Pickering, just outside of Toronto. So it's called Pickering, Springfield. Feel free to pick that up. I also wrote a book on Java and JPA. So if you're looking to learn about Hibernate, JPA, Spring Data, all that stuff, pick up a copy of Hibernate Made Easy. And also I've been working with a young freelancer named Darcy DeClute. You might have seen her on Twitter, @Scrumptuous. And she wrote a little book on Scrum Master certification. So if you're interested in Scrum, interested in advancing your career and getting certified, I highly recommend that book as well. If you're interested in my personal antics, you can always follow me on Twitter @CameronMCNZ. And if you're watching this on YouTube, I would say to you, why don't you just subscribe on YouTube?